It was supposed to be a seamless morning at Marlowe Industries, the kind executives bragged about in board meetings. The towering glass walls reflected the sun, the marble floors gleamed, and the scent of fresh espresso floated through the lobby. On the 35th floor, final preparations for the annual Investor Summit were in full swing. The air was sharp with ambition. Vivian Cross, CEO and legacy daughter of the company's founder, walked briskly down the hallway in blood-red heels that struck the floor like gavel hits. Her assistant trailed behind with a tablet, listing updates. All systems ready, Ms. Cross. The boardroom projector was tested last night. A sharp ding interrupted him. Then a shrill alarm buzzed from the conference wing. Vivian stopped mid-step. What now? A technician rushed out from the AV control room, pale and breathless. The central projection unit crashed. It's not responding to resets. The whole system's down, displays, speakers, cloud link, all of it. Vivian narrowed her eyes. And you're telling me this an hour before 50 billionaires walk through that door? We're trying everything, he stammered. But, it's like the system's bricked. She spun toward her assistant. Get IT. Get backup systems. Get my CTO if you have to fly him in. The technician shuffled back to the control room as panic spread like a virus through the staff. Calls buzzed. Laptops clicked. Voices rose. Down by the service elevators, a quiet figure leaned on his mop. Elijah Boone had been with the building for almost 3 years. To most people, he was just the janitor, the man in gray coveralls who cleaned up coffee spills and took out the trash after hours. No one remembered his name. No one noticed his eyes, sharp, calculating, always watching. Not until today. A stack of executives ran past him, shouting about HDMI ports and firewall overrides. One in turn glanced at Elijah and snorted, "You know anything about servers, Mr. Mop?" Elijah looked at him calmly and said nothing. Vivian marched toward the elevator, talking into her earpiece. She saw Elijah standing still amid the chaos and rolled her eyes. "Don't just stand there. Maybe go polish something." Elijah slowly nodded. Then Vivian, in a moment of sarcastic frustration, turned and said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Fix this mess, and I'll give you my car. How about that?" She chuckled and walked off. Everyone laughed, except Elijah. He looked at the AV control room, where blinking lights signaled a network collapse. Then he placed his mop gently against the wall, adjusted his gloves, and walked toward the chaos. "Hey, hey. Authorized personnel only," one technician said as Elijah stepped into the room. But the janitor ignored him. He walked straight to the back panel of the console, crouched, and ran his hand across the side casing. With a flick of his fingers, he popped off a protective latch no one else had noticed. "What is he doing?" another voice muttered. Elijah didn't answer. He just stared at the exposed core, eyes scanning the wiring like reading an old friend's face. He pulled a small, faded pouch from his pocket, a personal tool kit. The same one he hadn't touched in years. Somewhere down the hall, Vivian laughed in conversation with the CFO. She had already forgotten her mocking challenge. Back in the control room, Elijah removed a screwdriver and began delicately unscrewing the housing that protected the primary digital signal converter. The room fell awkwardly silent. One tech whispered, "Should we stop him?" But something about the way Elijah moved made people hesitate. He didn't fumble. He didn't guess. He diagnosed. 10 minutes passed. Elijah pulled out a blackened microchip that had shorted near the heat sink, a rare but deadly failure that even seasoned engineers missed. He held it up. "You got a spare 482K? Same generation?" The head AV guy blinked. Yeah, I think there's one in the old parts bin." "Bring it," Elijah said. By the time Vivian returned to the boardroom to see how bad the damage was, she froze in place. The screens were on. Crystal clear. No flicker. No lag. Every system that had failed was now operating perfectly. In fact, better than before. The CTO leaned in to whisper, "I don't know how, but it's not just fixed. It's optimized. Look at the latency speed." Vivian's eyes narrowed. Who did this? The room pointed, not to her tech team, not to her assistant, but to the janitor still crouched by the console, wiping his hands with a clean cloth. "Elijah," someone said. She walked up slowly, heels clicking. "You," she began. He stood. She stared at him, really looked, for the first time. His eyes were steady. His voice was calm. "You made a deal," he said softly. Vivian blinked. "Excuse me?" "You said, if I fix it, the car's mine." There was a beat of awkward laughter behind her. Someone coughed. Someone else looked away. Vivian scoffed, "You're not seriously holding me to that, are you?" It was a joke. Elijah didn't smile. Was the projector crashing a joke? Silence. Vivian shifted uncomfortably. "You're a janitor. How do you even know how to do this?" Elijah's eyes flickered. For a split second, something cold, deep, and intelligent passed through them. He said, "Because once, I was more than a janitor." And then he walked out, leaving the room buzzing with whispers and eyes full of questions. Elijah Boone didn't return to the janitor's closet. He didn't resume mopping floors or emptying bins. Instead, he stepped out onto the rooftop balcony, overlooking the skyline of a city that had long forgotten him. A soft wind pressed against his worn uniform, and for a moment, he allowed himself a breath of something he hadn't felt in years. Freedom. No, clarity. Back inside the boardroom, silence had turned to murmurs. Everyone had questions. Who was he, really? Where did he learn that? Why hadn't anyone noticed him before? Vivian Cross stood stiffly by the console, still clutching her coffee cup though the liquid had long gone cold. Her assistant hovered nearby, unsure whether to speak. "Do you know anything about him?" she asked under her breath. The assistant swallowed. Elijah Boone. Been working here a few years. Night shifts. Background checks clean. Lives in East Row. Keeps to himself. No incidents. Nothing unusual. Vivian frowned. Well, clearly, that's not the whole story. Downstairs, Elijah sat in the staff break room, ignored as usual. A group of young tech interns passed by him, joking about the janitor hack. One of them mimicked him holding a screwdriver. Another said, "Must have watched too many YouTube tutorials." Elijah smiled faintly but said nothing. Let them laugh. Let them think what they wanted. He'd learned long ago that people only saw what they wanted to. And they wanted to see a janitor. Not a man who once held 5 patents in hardware design. Not a man whose name was once spoken in Stanford lecture halls. Not a man who could have been sitting in the CEO's chair, had history gone differently. His thoughts drifted back to 7 years ago, to the day it all shattered. Back then, Elijah Boone was head of systems architecture at a rising tech company, Strathmore Innovations, a competitor to Marlowe Industries. Elijah wasn't just an employee, he was the mind behind its flagship AI-integrated projection systems. Clean code, fault-tolerant design, and an intuition for tech like it was breathing air. Then came the scandal. A massive data leak. Clients compromised. Investors panicked. Someone had to be blamed. Elijah knew who caused it, a greedy executive who sold server access to private buyers. He had the logs. He brought the evidence forward. But they buried it. They buried him. The story they spun was tidy, an angry systems engineer sabotaging his own code out of pride. His credentials were revoked. His reputation destroyed. Even his friends disappeared. No firm would touch him after that. And yet, Elijah refused to break. He refused to become bitter. He got quiet. Got humble. He became invisible. Because sometimes, invisibility is survival. Now, as he returned to his cleaning cart, the building looked different. Not because anything had changed, but because for the first time, they had seen him. But would they remember? Meanwhile, Vivian sat in her office, replaying the morning in her head. She pulled up Elijah's file. It was thin, too thin. Just a scanned ID, hire date, no college degree listed. Nothing suspicious, but something off. She enlarged the file photo. It was taken in shadow. Beard grown out. Eyes downcast. But today, those same eyes had met hers. Intelligent. Steady. Quietly defiant. She typed his name into a search engine. Nothing. No LinkedIn. No articles. No social media. Ghost. She leaned back in her chair, unsettled. Later that day, she called an internal meeting. Her top tech advisors sat in leather chairs, still uneasy from the morning's events. I want to know how a janitor fixed what none of you could. Her CTO spoke carefully. Ma'am, it wasn't just fixed. It was restructured. Like someone rewrote the system's language from scratch. He didn't repair it, he understood it better than we ever did. And you have no idea who he really is? None. Vivian looked out the window. Then find out. At the same time, in the far corner of the building's lowest level, Elijah opened his locker. Inside was a plastic lunchbox, a dog-eared copy of The Souls of Black Folk, and an old envelope wrapped in plastic. He pulled out the envelope and unfolded the note inside, handwritten, ink fading. You deserved better, Elijah. But you are better because of it. Stay close. Stay quiet. Your time will come again. A friend. It was the only thing that kept him here. The reason he stayed when he could have disappeared completely. He folded the note and tucked it away. Not yet, he thought. But soon. The next morning, things were different. People looked at him now. They nodded politely. Some even offered a smile. The very same executives who once stepped over his mop now gave him space. Vivian watched from the elevator cameras. She wasn't stupid. She recognized what was happening. Power had shifted, but not in the way it usually did. This wasn't about titles or salaries. Midnight arrived quietly. The building that buzzed with ambition by day now slumbered in sterile silence. Fluorescent lights flickered in maintenance mode. Security cameras blinked red in standby. The elevators were locked down. Only one room glowed faintly behind frosted glass on the 33rd floor, Conference Room A. Elijah Boone stood outside it, his boots scuffed, his hands clean, his heart steady. He knocked once. No answer, just the soft hiss of the door unlocking from within. He stepped inside. Vivian Cross sat at the far end of the conference table, a single lamp illuminating her face. The rest of the room remained in shadow. She wore no makeup, no heels, no armor. Just a black blazer over a white t-shirt and a stare sharp enough to cut glass. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said quietly. "You summoned me," Elijah replied. "That usually means something important." She gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit." He did. For a long moment, they said nothing. The silence wasn't awkward, it was surgical. Precise. As if both were measuring each other for weaknesses neither would show. Finally, Vivian spoke. 3 years, and I didn't notice you." "That's because you didn't look," Elijah said. She didn't flinch. "You fixed something no one could. You wrote code into a dead system using only a screwdriver and a memory stick." He said nothing. "I asked my people to trace your background," she continued. "I got dead ends. Encrypted academic records, a missing employment history." "Who are you?" Elijah met her eyes. "A man who remembers how easily people are erased." Vivian leaned back, folding her arms. "So you're here for revenge?" "No," his voice was even. "If I wanted revenge, I wouldn't have fixed your system." She studied him. "Then what do you want?" "Truth." Vivian's lips twitched, half smirk, half sorrow. "You think truth matters in places like this?" "I know it does," Elijah replied. "It's the only thing that survives the storm." The air thickened. Vivian reached into her bag and pulled out a thin folder. She slid it across the table. Inside were photos of Elijah from years ago. Smiling at a podium. Speaking at a tech conference. Listed as Chief Systems Architect of Strathmore Innovations. "You were brilliant," she said, almost softly. "I still am," he replied. "What happened?" He tapped the folder. "You already know." Vivian's jaw tightened. "The leak. The scandal. You were blamed." "I was framed." "By who?" "Your company's acquisitions officer. The one who pressured Strathmore into a backdoor deal. When I refused to hide the breach, I became the scapegoat." Vivian blinked. "My name was wiped. My contracts voided. The media ran what they were fed. I disappeared so your stock prices wouldn't." He pushed the folder back. "Truth enough for you?" Vivian looked down, then away. Elijah stood. "I came tonight not for closure, but for clarity. I want to know why you hired me." Vivian met his gaze. "Because my father told me to." That stopped him. "He passed 2 years ago," she said quietly. "But before he died, he gave me a list of names. People he said I'd forgotten. People who'd once held this company up from beneath." She gave a thin smile. "He said one of them would walk back through these doors. And when they did, I'd know." Elijah's voice was soft. "Your father hired me." "Not officially. He slipped you into the facilities crew. Gave you a false background. Even paid you out of his private account. She slid a photo across the table, Elijah shaking hands with her father, years ago. You weren't invisible, she said. Just, waiting. Elijah sat down again. He didn't smile, but his shoulders eased. Vivian leaned forward. You proved a point I didn't know needed proving. That value doesn't wear a suit. That silence isn't weakness. That genius can hold a mop. He raised an eyebrow. And what now? You want to give me the car? Vivian chuckled for the first time. I was thinking, something better. She slid a second folder across the table. Elijah opened it. It was an offer letter. Position, Chief Systems Integrity Officer. Full autonomy. Board-level access. Salary, blank. Write your number. He looked up. I don't want to parade you, she said. I want you where you belong. The silence returned, but this time, it was heavier. Not tense, but transformational. Elijah closed the folder. I'll think about it. Vivian nodded. Fair. He rose again and turned to leave. But before he reached the door, he paused. There's something else you should know, he said without turning. Vivian straightened. There's a flaw in your security infrastructure. Not the one that failed today. A deeper one. The kind no one finds unless they know where to look. Vivian froze. I found it while fixing the projector. Buried in your legacy code. Someone embedded a tracker. Could have been exfiltrating data for years. She swallowed. Can you stop it? Elijah looked over his shoulder. I already did. Then he left, the door hissing shut behind him. Vivian sat alone in the silence he left behind, a silence before the storm of change about to shake her company, her pride, and her understanding of power. Outside, Elijah walked through the lobby, past rows of glass and marble, his reflection now clearer than ever. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a ghost. He felt like a storm. The sun rose over Marlowe Industries with clinical precision, casting long shadows across the steel and glass facade. Inside, the buzz had changed. Whispers replaced laughter. Respect replaced mockery. And somewhere in the heart of it all, Elijah Boone worked like a ghost in reverse, not fading, but finally appearing. Down in the data center, engineers murmured about the janitor who wasn't, while upstairs, executives replayed the footage of the projector system coming back to life. No one spoke to Elijah directly, but they watched. And they wondered. Vivian Cross, however, didn't have the luxury of wondering. She had a corporation to lead, a board to answer to, and a private offer still hanging in limbo. She hadn't told anyone about their midnight meeting. Not yet. Not even the board. Instead, she found herself pacing the executive garage that afternoon, standing beside her gleaming white Tesla Model S, the very car she had mockingly offered to Elijah in front of the entire office. She had laughed when she said it. He hadn't. Now she couldn't forget it. The elevator chimed. Elijah stepped out, freshly changed into crisp dark jeans and a plain button-up shirt. Still no tie. Still no badge. Vivian turned to face him. I wasn't sure you'd come. You invited me to the garage, Elijah said calmly. Didn't seem like the kind of meeting I should ignore. She nodded toward the Tesla. You remember what I said? I do. She walked slowly around the car, her heels echoing in the quiet. I said if you fixed the system, the car was yours. Everyone heard it. They thought it was a joke. It wasn't, he said. Vivian stopped. You really want the car? Elijah studied her for a long moment. Then he stepped forward and placed a flash drive on the Tesla's hood. This is what I want, he said. The full diagnostic data from the security breach I found. Cleaned, unpacked, decoded. Vivian's eyes widened. You already finished it? He nodded. I started the night I joined. I just didn't know what I was looking for back then. Now I do. She picked up the drive, holding it like it might burn her fingers. What's on here? Proof, he said simply. Not just of the breach, but of who's behind it. Vivian stiffened. Inside the company? Yes. One of your board members is selling access. Not just old systems, future builds. Prototypes. She blinked, stunned. Which one? I didn't put a name on the file, Elijah said. You'll see it when you're ready. Vivian stared at him, then at the car. You could have sold this. Taken a payout. Left. I didn't want a car, he said softly. I wanted you to understand that your offer wasn't insulting because of the Tesla. It was insulting because you thought that was my price. She looked away. I fixed your system, Elijah continued. I protected your network. I even handed you the trader on your own board. And you still think I'm here for a reward? Vivian's jaw tensed. So why are you here? Elijah stepped closer. I'm here because you need someone who understands both sides of the glass. The executive floor, and the maintenance hall. The system's surface, and its broken code beneath. You asked who I was before. He paused. I'm the man who sees everything. Vivian swallowed hard. I meant what I offered last night. The position. The full authority. Write your number. Elijah gave a small smile. Keep the title. Keep the car. She looked confused. I'll take the office on one condition, he said. You give my old janitor locker to a new hire. Vivian raised an eyebrow. A janitor? He nodded. One who needs a second chance. Someone like me. Silence hung between them again, dense, electric. Then she pulled the Tesla key from her pocket and held it out. He didn't take it. Drive it home, she said quietly. At least once. Not because I mocked you. But because you earned it. This time, Elijah took the key. Not because he needed the car. But because accepting it meant she had changed. That evening, the sleek Model S glided silently down South Ridge Avenue, drawing stares as it pulled up in front of a modest apartment complex. Elijah stepped out slowly, locking it with a soft chirp. A few kids ran up to admire the car. Yo, Mr. Boone. That's you. He smiled. Just borrowing it. His neighbor, Ms. Reddick, leaned out from her second-floor window. Elijah, Lord have mercy. That yours? He looked up. Not really. She cackled. Don't lie to me, boy. You rolling up here like a silent James Bond. Elijah laughed, but his eyes drifted to a rusted bicycle chained to the lamppost. A memory struck, of writing to interviews that never called back, of rainy days spent wiping tables no one noticed. Now, he held the keys to the building's future. But more than that, he held the respect they'd once tried to strip from him. At Marlowe Industries the next morning, a surprise email landed in the inbox of every department head. From Vivian Cross. Subject, Elijah Boone, Systems Integrity Officer. Message. You've already seen what he can do. Now you'll see what happens when Brilliance is given the floor it deserves. Effective immediately, Mr. Boone has full clearance to audit, repair, and restructure every system you rely on. Resistance is not only futile, it's obsolete. Below her signature, a single line. Some people fix machines. Others fix mindsets. Back in the janitor's closet, now empty, Elijah left behind a folded note taped to the wall. To whoever walks this path next. They won't see you. Not at first. But one day, if you keep your eyes open, they'll finally open theirs. He smiled, closed the door behind him, and walked upstairs, not to clean up after others anymore, but to build something new from the ground up. Not just code. Not just systems. But a future. The office was a different world after dark. No keystrokes. No elevator dings. No clipped heels pacing the glass walkways. Just the soft hum of machines and the occasional creak of the building settling into itself. It was in this stillness that truths often surfaced, when the performance faded and real intentions stepped forward. Elijah Boone sat alone in his new office. It wasn't large, he had requested it not be. Tucked between the cybersecurity wing and the forgotten archives, the space had been untouched for years. A single desk. One window. Clean walls. No distractions. Just silence and code. He leaned back in his chair, hands behind his head, eyes half closed. On the wall beside him, the data board scrolled slowly. Logins. Packet transfers. Server pings. Hundreds of tiny digital voices humming in sync. Except one. He saw it. An anomaly. A ghost in the stream. He leaned forward, typing quickly. An encrypted signal buried within internal traffic. Not outgoing, but looping, as if bouncing around the system like a fly trapped under glass. Someone was watching. Still. He tapped his comms. Vivian. We need to talk. She arrived 20 minutes later, no security detail, no assistant, no hesitation. Vivian stepped into Elijah's office, glancing around at the minimalist space. You really did pick the least flashy room in the entire tower. I didn't come back for furniture, Elijah replied, not looking away from the screen. I came back to finish something. Vivian sat across from him. What did you find? He pointed at the anomaly, a rotating fragment of code masquerading as a diagnostic ping. It's backdoor surveillance. Someone embedded a ghost protocol inside the recovery logs. It's reading every error report, every crash log, and interpreting them. Building profiles. Profiles on what? People, Elijah said. You. Me. Everyone who touches a company device. Vivian's voice dropped. That's illegal. It's smart, Elijah said. Malicious. But smart. It learns your system's weaknesses. Your habits. Predicts failure before it happens. But it doesn't report to you. Vivian's eyes narrowed. So who's it reporting to? Elijah turned the screen. A string of location tags bloomed, each one attached to a different Wi-Fi echo, none of them inside the building. Off-site, he said. Encrypted IPs. Relayed through dummy hosts. But look, see this signature. She leaned in. That's from a device only issued to board-level execs. And this ID string? He paused. Belongs to someone on your inner circle. Vivian stared at the screen, then slowly exhaled. How long? 3 years, Elijah said. Started just after your father passed. Which means this wasn't his doing. Her face tightened. No. He hated data mining. Called it corporate voyeurism. Elijah tapped the desk. Then whoever did this waited for him to be out of the way. Vivian stood, pacing the room. You think this is how they stayed ahead of decisions? How they always knew what direction I'd lean before the vote? Elijah nodded. They're not leaking your ideas, they're stealing your foresight. Vivian stopped at the window, hands on her hips. So what do we do? We wait. She turned. Wait. Elijah pointed to a small blinking square on the screen. That ghost code. I redirected it. It's still feeding them, but I control the feed now. Vivian blinked. You set bait. He nodded. If they're watching, we feed them a lie. Something tempting enough to force a move. Vivian grinned for the first time. You've done this before. Elijah smiled faintly. Once or twice. She stepped closer. You ever think about what life would have been like if you'd never been erased? I used to, he said. Now I think about what comes next. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the screen. Then she asked, why didn't you expose them sooner? Because until now, Elijah said, they didn't know I was watching. Hours later, Vivian returned to her penthouse suite, but sleep refused to find her. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city, Elijah's words echoing in her mind. They didn't know I was watching. It struck her how similar their paths had been, only in opposite directions. She had risen by staying visible, always commanding the spotlight. He had survived by fading into the shadows. And yet both had been powerless in their own ways. Her father's death had left her surrounded by sharks. Elijah's truth had left him buried under their feet. Now, together, they were rewriting the script. She picked up her phone. No messages. No alerts. Still, she felt the tension in her chest, a storm coiling beneath calm waters. Back in the office, Elijah waited. He didn't sleep. He watched. Watched the data stream. Watched the ghost code. Watched the lie they'd planted, a fabricated project memo titled Project Scepter, Quantum Integration Timeline, Confidential Draft. It was false. A ghost of a ghost. But if the mole was greedy, they'd bite. And when they did, Elijah would trace it, not just to the traitor, but to whoever paid for their betrayal. He closed his eyes briefly, the soft hum of the servers like a lullaby. Midnight conversations had a way of revealing truth. But tonight, they would expose power. At exactly 7:45 a.m., the Marlowe Industries boardroom began to fill. The chairs were polished. Coffee was poured. And behind the modern glass walls, tension curled like smoke. This wasn't a regular quarterly meeting. Everyone felt it. Vivian Cross entered last. She was calm, dressed in a simple charcoal suit, her hair tied back, her eyes colder than usual. She didn't bother with small talk or pleasantries. She went straight to the head of the table and tapped her digital tablet. All of you will receive a secure file in 3 seconds, she said. Open it. Now. Around the table, devices chimed. Mouths tightened. Brows furrowed. One man coughed. The file was titled Project Scepter, Integration Report. It looked real, Marlowe's letterhead, highly classified tags, technical specs, global licensing maps. But it was fiction. Every word. Elijah Boone had written it like a siren song for corporate traders. Vivian watched the board closely. Her gaze wasn't curious, it was surgical. 9 members. 8 glanced at the file with confusion. 1 didn't. Gerald Stenton. Head of Strategic Development. 40 years in the industry. The man who always knew when to pivot. Who always beat the market by 1/4. Who always smiled too long when he shook your hand. Vivian saw it in his eyes, a flicker of something else. Recognition. He didn't look intrigued. He looked worried. Later that day, Elijah stood beside a glowing data wall, his eyes scanning the outbound server logs. He found it. A duplicate signal. Someone had transferred the Project Scepter file to an external relay 10 minutes after the meeting ended. Cloaked, encrypted, rerouted, but not invisible. Not to him. He tracked it to an IP address tagged to a private firm in Zurich. The metadata timestamp was buried under spoofed code, but Elijah had already written a secondary script. He cracked the false signature like peeling paint. And there it was. Gerald's device ID. He stared at it in silence. Not because he was surprised, but because now came the hard part. Convincing the system to believe the truth. Vivian stood in her private office, sunlight casting long shadows across the floor. Elijah entered without knocking. He held up the tablet. "We have our man." She read the name. Her face stayed frozen. "Stenton," she said flatly. "Yes. You're certain?" "I traced the packet trail. Burned through every false proxy. He's the one feeding our tech to foreign buyers." Vivian turned to the window, her arms folded. "He was my father's friend." Elijah didn't respond. She continued, "He gave the toast at our IPO. He held me when my mother died. I was 8. Still, Elijah stayed silent. Finally, she turned. "And now I'm supposed to drag him into the fire based on one data log?" Elijah's voice was calm. "You're not dragging him anywhere. He's already there. You're deciding whether to call it what it is." Vivian sat at the edge of her desk. "Do you know what happens when I accuse him?" "Yes," he replied. "You shatter the illusion of safety. You admit betrayal wasn't across the street, it was at your table." She looked at him. "And if I'm wrong?" "You're not." "But if I am?" Elijah stepped closer. "Then let me show you again." He set down the tablet and tapped the screen. It opened a surveillance clip, inside a boardroom lounge. Audio off. Silent footage. Gerald Stenton, alone, pulling out his phone. Scanning the file. Typing rapidly. "I diverted the server to a silent observer node," Elijah said. "It's your system now. Not his." Vivian watched the footage loop. Her fingers trembled. "Say it," Elijah said gently. She shook her head. "Say what he is." Vivian clenched her jaw. Elijah stepped forward. "Vivian, say it." Her voice cracked. "He's a traitor." And for the first time in years, she cried. 3 days later, Gerald Stenton was escorted from Marlowe Industries by security. No press statement. No police report, yet. But everyone saw it. The headlines speculated, executive retirement, boardroom shakeup. But inside the company, the truth leaked like cold air under a locked door. Someone had turned on the throne. And behind it all, the silent hand of Elijah Boone. Vivian sat at her desk late into the night. Across from her, Elijah reviewed firewall reports, casually sipping tea. The tension between them had changed. It wasn't resistance anymore. It was reckoning. "I doubted you," she said suddenly. He looked up. "I expected that. I wasn't ready to believe someone I trusted could betray me." He gave a small nod. "That's the cruelest part. We doubt the truth when it feels too personal." Vivian met his gaze. "You know what I envy about you?" "What?" "You walk through this building like no one can touch you. Like you've already lost everything worth losing, and now nothing scares you." He thought about that for a moment. Then said, "That's not fearlessness. That's freedom." She leaned back. "And what if I want that too?" Elijah stood. "Then stop doubting yourself every time you're right." Vivian looked down. And whispered, "I'll try." He walked to the door but paused before leaving. "The storm isn't over," he said. "It's just changing shape." Vivian watched him go, her hands no longer trembling, but her mind wide awake. The media finally caught on. It started as a whisper, an anonymous tip to a tech blog claiming that someone on the Marlowe Industries board had been quietly removed. By the next morning, headlines screamed across financial news outlets. Insider espionage at Marlowe. Mysterious shakeup amidst new tech initiative. CEO silent, but security tightens. Inside the building, the shift was undeniable. ID checks became stricter. Communications were encrypted end-to-end. Employees were told not to speak to the press. And those who had once scoffed at Elijah Boone now cleared paths when he walked by. He didn't bask in the attention. He watched. He listened. He waited. Because deep down, he knew Gerald Stenton wasn't working alone. That evening, Vivian called an emergency meeting, with only 3 people, Elijah, the company's internal legal counsel, and a quiet woman in a navy blue suit named Lenora Gates, a former federal investigator now heading Marlowe's risk division. They sat around a private table in the upper-level strategy suite. Curtains drawn. Phones off. Vivian opened the conversation. "I need the truth," she said, "and I don't want it softened." Lenora spoke first. "We ran a forensic sweep of every known contact Gerald had in the past 2 years, calls, financials, travel records, even anonymous donations. The money trail led to a shell firm in Dubai." Elijah nodded. "That's where the ghost code pointed after Zurich. A layered laundering chain. But here's the twist," Lenora continued. "The Dubai shell has links not just to foreign buyers, but to competitors in California. Tech firms hungry for prototypes. Hungry enough to buy them off a desperate executive." Vivian leaned forward. "How much did he sell?" "We estimate $42 million in proprietary assets over 2.5 years, Lenora replied. "Hardware designs, AI modules, project timelines, enough to give someone a full roadmap of where we're headed for the next decade." Silence. Vivian turned to Elijah. "We thought he was the threat." "He was just the leak," Elijah said. "The real threat is who caught the water." Vivian tapped her fingers against the table. "So what's the next move?" Elijah hesitated, then said, "We make a public statement." Lenora blinked. "That's risky." "I know," he said. "But transparency is the only thing that earns back trust. Investors are nervous. Employees are whispering. We show them strength by owning the truth." Vivian's expression tightened. "You want me to walk into a press conference and admit a betrayal at the highest level of my board?" Elijah nodded. "Yes. Because that's what a real leader does. Not hide. Not spin. Stand." Vivian looked down at the polished table. For a long moment, she said nothing. "Then, schedule it for tomorrow morning." At 9 a.m., the press gathered in the Marlowe atrium, reporters, analysts, camera crews, bloggers. They all expected spin. Maybe even silence. What they got was Vivian Cross, standing at the podium, no teleprompter in sight. Her speech began simply. "3 years ago, my father passed me this company with a quiet warning: the higher you rise, the more you must watch your feet. I didn't understand him then. I do now." The room held its breath. A member of our board, someone we trusted, betrayed this company's vision and sold our work to the highest bidder. We have since identified the scope of that betrayal and taken steps to protect our future. A flash of cameras. No one moved. We will not hide behind denial. We will not excuse corruption. And we will never again underestimate the people who walk our halls in silence. And then, with quiet power, she added. Marlowe's integrity was restored, not by our titles, but by a man we all failed to see. Elijah Boone. She turned and gestured. And Elijah stepped forward. The room erupted. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He simply nodded, his eyes scanning the sea of faces, many of them the same ones who once laughed at his mop bucket. Vivian placed a hand on his shoulder. He saw what we didn't. And because of that, Marlowe survives today. After the conference, as they stepped into the elevator, Vivian finally exhaled. "That was the most terrifying thing I've ever done," she said. "It was also the bravest," Elijah replied. She looked at him. "You believe in all this? Still?" Elijah turned to her. "I didn't come back because I believed in the company. I came back because I believed someone here still could." Vivian nodded slowly. "And what about you? What about me? Do you believe in yourself again?" The elevator stopped. He stepped out. Paused. Then turned back. "I never stopped. I just had to wait for the world to catch up." That night, Marlowe's stock rebounded. Not because the press conference was polished. Not because investors trusted every word. But because, for the first time in years, they saw a company telling the truth. It wasn't a performance. It was a trial of faith. And Elijah Boone had passed it with quiet fire. In his office, Elijah opened a letter addressed to him in handwriting he recognized immediately. Vivian's. Inside was a simple note. "You reminded me that faith isn't blind, it's brave. Keep watching. Keep building. V." Elijah folded the note and pinned it beside his desk. He looked out the window at the city, breathing deep. The storm was fading. But the real work, the rebuilding, was only beginning. 3 weeks later, Marlowe Industries didn't just recover, it transformed. The whispers faded. The jokes died. And a new culture began to take root, not one built on power suits and pedigree, but on respect, transparency, and earn trust. And at the quiet center of it all was Elijah Boone. No longer a janitor. No longer a ghost. No longer hidden. Every morning he arrived before dawn, as he always had. But now he didn't unlock a mop closet, he unlocked a secure server lab that bore his name on the door. Employees greeted him with nods, not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. He had become something rare in the corporate world. A symbol. Vivian Cross stood before the board, alone for the first time since Stenton's removal. She held no files, no clicker, no PR spin. Just purpose. "I want to establish a new division," she said. "Not to manage technology. Not to streamline data. But to protect people. Their dignity. Their stories. Their second chances." The room went still. She continued. "We've all seen how genius can be buried. How truth can be ignored if it doesn't wear the right badge or speak in the right tone. I propose we build a lab for unseen talent, those who don't come from Ivy League, those with gaps in their resumes, those who've lived through something and still stood up." She paused, then added. "And I want Elijah Boone to lead it." There were no objections. The following week, a modest plaque was installed beside the east stairwell where Elijah once cleaned floors in silence. It read, "Boone Initiative, Lab of Second Sight. Dedicated to the unseen minds who shape the future beneath our notice. Founded 2025 ***. Elijah stood beside it quietly, his hands in his pockets. He said nothing as staff gathered around, watching, photographing, posting. He didn't like the spotlight. But he understood what it meant. The world wasn't applauding him. They were awakening to themselves. That night, Elijah returned to his apartment. The Tesla sat parked outside, not as a trophy, but as a reminder. He still lived simply. Still brewed his own coffee. Still read from the same weathered copy of The Souls of Black Folk. But inside, something had shifted. He sat at his kitchen table and unfolded the old letter again, the one his silent benefactor had left him years ago. "You deserved better. But you are better because of it. Your time will come again." He finally picked up a pen. And beneath it, wrote. It did. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, a man stared at a terminal in an offshore firm in Tokyo. He watched as access logs failed, one after the other, encryption tightening around every Marlowe endpoint. The screen flashed red. Permission denied, trace log initiated. He swore, slammed the laptop shut, and made a call. Back in the US, Elijah's tracking system registered the attempt. He smiled softly. "They're still trying." Vivian, who stood beside him, glanced over. "You're not worried?" "No," he said. "You don't fear shadows when you've walked through darker things." She studied him. "You know. I used to think leadership meant talking louder. Now I think it means listening longer." He turned to her. "You listened when it mattered." Vivian shook her head. "No. You waited when it mattered. I just caught up." The next day, a new janitor walked through the lobby. A young man named Devon, quiet, thoughtful, and with a sealed record that scared off every job he'd applied to. He pushed a mop cart past the reception desk. No one stopped him. But then the elevator dinged, and out stepped Elijah. He walked over, nodded, and said, "Come with me." Devon looked confused. "I haven't finished cleaning." Elijah smiled. You've already cleaned enough. Time to build something. They rode the elevator up, side by side. No questions asked. By the end of the month, the Boone initiative had 3 hires, each with unconventional backgrounds, an ex-con turned coder, a dropout who taught herself AI, and a retired mechanic who reverse-engineered military-grade encryption for fun. Each of them had been rejected elsewhere. Now they were rewriting the future. And at the center of it all was a man who had once been asked to polish floors he could have designed himself. During a rare lunch break, Elijah sat on the rooftop garden, sipping tea. Vivian joined him, settling into the chair beside him. "I'm leaving," she said quietly. He raised an eyebrow. She clarified, "Not forever. Just a month. I need to step back. Rethink who I am outside of this tower." He nodded. "You've earned that." "I used to think I was this company," she said. "Turns out, I was just keeping it warm for someone who could really see it." "You were more than that," Elijah said. "You were the first one who turned around." She smiled. "Still feels like I arrived late to my own life." "Better late," he said, "than never awake at all." That evening, as golden light poured through the glass walls of Marlowe's highest floor, Elijah stood alone. The digital skyline blinked behind him. And he spoke, not aloud, but inwardly, to the version of himself that once slept on park benches, clutching a folded resume no one would read. "They didn't see you back then. But you never needed them to. You just needed one chance. And now, you give others what the world tried to take from you. A reason to rise again." And somewhere, deep within the system, a new line of code pulsed through every Marlowe device. A message embedded in the heartbeat of the network. Dignity. Security. Seen. The machine was fixed. But more importantly, the people were waking up.